everything you ever wanted to know about Judaism, but we're afraid to ask. Let's talk about it with Rabbi Shai Held on Steve Brown, etc.
He's an old white guy, an author, broadcaster, and seminary professor who's sick of religion. And he's brought friends. Please welcome Steve Brown, etc.
Hey, we are so glad you're here. It is a high and holy compliment that you would take time from a busy schedule and spend it with us. And trust me on this, you are not going to be disappointed. In case you were wondering, I'm Steve, the aforementioned old white guy. As I say all the time, you have a place at our table, we just don't let you talk. Matthew Porter is our executive producer, writer, director, and fashion icon. And our producer, Jeremy, is in the little glass booth. Jeremy has a classic rock band. Interestingly enough, and you didn't know this, I started preaching around the time the Eagles first showed up on the scene. No, not the band, the bird. Our one-man IT department, John Myers, is in the tech bunker. John edits the show, fixes our computers, and gets us Netflix for free.
Don't tell anybody.
And Dr. George Bingham is the president of Key Life. George says that having a beard isn't what makes you a man, but it sure doesn't hurt. And Kathy Wyatt is the soft feminine side of the program. I won't say that Kathy is too into details, but it does keep her awake at night that the letters OCD aren't in alphabetical order. We've been looking forward to this program for a very long time. If you're familiar at all with me, you know that this is an area that I have extreme concern. And you're going to hear me do something that you never hear on a broadcast. I'm going to apologize to our guests, so don't go anywhere. Shai Held is a theologian, educator, an author. He serves as president and dean of Hagar Institute in New York. He also hosts their new podcast called Answers Withheld. What a great name.
Yeah.
Shai has previously written 2 other books, and his latest, which I hold in my nicotine-stained fingers, is titled Judaism is About Love, Recovering the Heart of Jewish Life. Rabbi, before we do anything else, your faith, your heritage, has received sometimes not so loving from mine, and we talk about love a lot, and I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I don't speak for everybody, but if you'll give me their names, I'll pray for their deaths. And because I'm a loving, kind, and gentle person. But at any rate, I'm sorry for the misconceptions. I'm sorry for what's been said. I'm sorry for the pogroms. I'm sorry for what Martin Luther said. That's enough. I'm not going to say I'm sorry anymore, but I needed to say it at least once. Hey, tell us, when you sat down in the chair and decided to write this book, what was bubbling? What caused you to do that? I mean, you were doing well. You had a good salary, and you didn't have to go out and do this. And this is a big book. This took a lot of time. What started it? What did it?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Steve, for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here. I would say that in retrospect, there were 2 experiences that I had that set me on the course of working on this book, one of which I discussed in the introduction, and one of which I now regret that I don't. And if I could, I want to just share briefly those experiences because they really gave shape to a lot of what I've done as a teacher and a writer and an educator. About 25 years ago, I was speaking to a group of senior rabbinical students at one of the major American rabbinical seminaries. And in passing, I said, Judaism is a story about a God who loves us and beckons us to love God back. And one of the students said, somewhat sneeringly, "I'm sorry, but that sounds like Christianity to me." And I found that response actually quite devastating. And I said to him, it's so interesting to me that you say that, because I was thinking about the twice a day liturgical moment in Judaism in which we say, "With vast love have you, God, loved us." And then we recite Deuteronomy chapter 6, "And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your being and all your might." In other words, a God who loves us and beckons us to love God back. Now, if you hear Christianity in that, then we have to ask just how deeply so many of us Jews have internalized a traditional Christian anti-Jewish idea that Judaism is not about love, that Christianity is about love and Judaism is about something else. And in some fundamental way, my career was shaped by the desire to reclaim, restore what I think lies at the very heart of Judaism. And we know that minority groups often come to see themselves the way majority groups see them. And I think in the history of Judaism, we very much had that experience where Jews internalized a lot of Christian bias, some of which you alluded to, Steve, in your opening. The second experience that, again, I regret not having written about was I was speaking to a group of high school students at an interfaith conference. And although this was the late 90s, it was set up as if it was the 1950s. The kids were divided into Jews, Catholics, and Protestants.
Oh, man.
And so I'm speaking to a class of 20 Protestant kids. They're all entering their junior or senior year of high school, if I recall. And again, in passing, I say, "So guys, remind me, what does Jesus say is the great command?" All 20 hands shoot up. I call on one kid, and he very proudly tells me about love of God and love of neighbor. And then innocently I say, "And now remind me, what was Jesus quoting?" Not a single hand in the room goes up. Not a single one. The answer, by the way, is Leviticus and Deuteronomy, as you know. And I remember thinking in that moment, now I kind of understand how Christians have been able to tell a story about how Judaism was a loveless religion and Christianity came into the world to introduce love. Because none of you, not a single one of you in this room, know what wells Jesus drank from. You don't actually know kind of what he was nurtured in and raised in. And, those two experiences, I wish I could say to you that in those moments, I knew that those two experiences were going to set the course of my life as a writer and a thinker. That's actually really would not be true. It's in retrospect that I came to realize how deeply those experiences had reverberated for me and how they set this agenda for this book, which is really twofold. One is to write for Jews, to help restore the heart of Jewish life. And I mean the heart in both senses of that word, heart as in core and heart as in our heart. But also to write for a Christian audience, because I have met countless Christians who know that what they say were taught in seminary or Sunday school about Jews and Judaism is obsolete and offensive, but they don't really know what to replace it with. And, to the extent that I can make some small contribution in helping Christians think differently about Jews and Judaism, I will count myself enormously blessed.
I suspect, if you haven't, you will. You will probably receive some criticism from both your family and ours. Have you encountered much of that?
I haven't encountered much of it since the book has come out, at least not yet, but it's only been a few weeks. But I have over the years. I mean, some of the things I can start with Jews, some Jews have suggested, the fact that you're saying Judaism is about love is itself an internalization of a Christian preoccupation. Judaism is about a lot of things. It's about love, and it's about justice, and it's about care, and it's about et cetera, et cetera. I think that that's an interesting criticism, but I don't find it persuasive. I think it's hard to read, say, the book of Deuteronomy and not come away with the impression that love is its central preoccupation. There's a lot we could say about that, obviously. from Christians, so I'll tell you that I had a really startling anti-Semitic experience the day the book came out, where Farrar, Straus and Giroux, my publisher, put out a tweet with the name of the book and its subtitle, Recovering the Heart of Jewish Life, to which someone responded, "The heart of Jewish life is the deicide."
Oh.
And I thought to myself, wow, what century are we in right now that this is what we're doing? So, I mean, I don't know if we would call that criticism. We would just call that anti-Semitism, I guess.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, I was asked just this past week by a seminary professor, a Christian seminary professor, whether I thought that Christian ideas had, quote unquote, leaked into my understanding of Judaism. And, one of the many things I said in response is...
Wait. Hey, Rabbi, hold it. And people will be sitting on the edge of their chair. This is called a teaser in the profession.
Pins and needles.
We gotta pay for this, so we're gonna back out. And if you miss a second of it, you're gonna have your friend say, "You missed it, you turkey. You missed something really, really good." The book, by the way, is Judaism is About Love, Recovering the Heart of Jewish Life. This is hard work, so we're gonna rest up, have some cookies and milk, and then we're going to return. Hey, thanks for being with us. We're talking to theologian, educator, author Shai Held, Rabbi, his latest book, and it is a very good book, complete. It'll blow you away, called Judaism is About Love, Recovering the Heart of Jewish Life. Shai, before the break, you had given us two incidents. One about how the love was about Christians, and one of your students had said that. And then you brought up a professor at I guess a Protestant seminary, and I interrupted you because we had to do the break. You want to tell us that story?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually, I was thinking about an experience I had just last week, actually, where a professor at a Protestant seminary said to me, asked what I thought was a really interesting question. He said, "It's clear from this book that you have been a lifelong student of Christian theology and not just of Judaism. To what extent would you think that your study of Christian theology has leaked into your understanding of Judaism?" But that was just a very interesting question, and the formulation
it should have been the
leak.
opposite. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, so what I said to him was that, first of all, I think it's complicated because, the earliest Christians obviously were Jews. And so some of these kind of interesting early Christian ideas actually emerge out of the same milieu and the same community. That's, piece number one. Piece number two is I actually think that reading in other traditions without being confused about which is yours and which isn't can actually lead you to see things that are in your tradition, but that are currently latent or underemphasized. And, I would say actually that some time I spent in college reading Buddhist texts actually helped me see just how central compassion was as the virtue in the Talmud. It wasn't like those sources weren't there, but actually reading other people talking about it enabled me to kind of recenter my attention. Now, where I think that can get messy is if we get confused and end up, in this weird kind of syncretism where we're all in the same religion. That's not what I think at all. I am very much not a Christian. I'm very much a Jew, but I have a lifelong appreciation for and deep learning from Christian sources and Christian thinkers.
Shai, I'm curious in these conversations that you've had over the years, and I love just how just kind of open-handed you are, with talking to different people. Are there any common misconceptions or misunderstandings that Christians have about Judaism that you come across more often than not, and not even biases or bad prejudices against them? Just misunderstandings or something that we don't commonly understand.
Yeah, I appreciate that question because, we could talk about biases, but your question is in some ways more interesting than that and less obvious. So I would say that there is something really common among Christians. I suspect this is true about humans, but it's true about Christians, I notice, is that Christians often assume that the questions that animate their religious discussions must also be the same questions that other religious communities are animated by. Here's a very extreme example. I have a colleague who's a Jewish chaplain at a major university who was telling me that the thing that Christian students are consistently surprised by when they talk to him is that Jews don't spend all their time talking about how they don't believe that Jesus is the Messiah. That Jews don't talk about Jesus at all, right? It's just not our discussion, right? Not Jesus is not a central issue in Jewish life. It's just, our concerns are different. Our questions are different. I think in a similar way, Jews, for example, don't talk about salvation as an animating category. So sometimes, Christians have said to me over the years, well, wait, if it's not Jesus, how are Jews saved? And one of the things I've sometimes said is, just understand that that's forcing a totally Christian question onto a Jew. I can tell you how we think about some of the issues that come up when you talk about salvation, but just know that is not a discussion that we have. So I think, what I love about your question is that it's worth thinking about how we sort of project our concerns onto others and then don't necessarily find them thinking about those questions.
Mm. Are you offended when that happens, or do you do a gentle answer turns away wrath?
No, I am definitely not offended by those questions, especially when they're asked in good faith and innocence, right? I mean, people ask wrong-headed questions out of genuine curiosity, and I see those as honestly like a teaching opportunity or even just a conversational opportunity to say, well, how might we hold this up to the light in a different way? I'm sure, honestly, that I have asked Christians questions that have seemed sort of strange to them. So I'm not offended by that. The only things that offend me are when people ask me sort of explicitly hostile or aggressive questions, or obviously the reference I made earlier to that completely deranged tweet, about how, Judaism is about a deicide. That I don't have a whole lot of time for, and that person is obviously not open to a conversation. But my response in general, to the extent that I possibly can, is to meet people with conversation and, listen to what's concerning to them and see whether they're also open to learning just as I am, or as I hope to be.
By the way, if you're listening or watching and you wonder what deicide has to do with Judaism, one of the charges is that Jews are cursed because they killed Jesus. That is very stupid. The blood of Christ always blesses. It doesn't curse, first. And secondly, you did it. They didn't. So I haven't heard that in a long time. I used to hear it. I'm an old guy.
I also hadn't heard it in a very long time. I was really taken aback.
Yeah, it really is kind of...
Rabbi, we're close to the next segment. I really have enjoyed your book, and maybe take it as some encouragement that having sat under Steve's teaching, as he mentioned, for over 40 years, and the believers that we're associated with, it was not at all surprising to think of a loving God in the Old Testament, and the law as an expression of God's love and His commitment to His people. But I was drawn and hanging out with Calvinists. I was drawn to your chapter on engaging chosenness. And I don't know without, if there's any kind of short comments or whatever, with limited time, that you would share with that from that chapter.
Don't say a word, Rabbi. That also is a teaser, and we're going to talk about it on the other side of the break. Hey, listen, this is a great book, and I know it was written to both Jews and Goyim, but if you're not Jewish, you believe things that just aren't true. And this book will wake you up. You'll be woke. In a good sense, you'll be woke. And we're going to talk about it more when we come back. So just don't go anywhere. Hey, it's so good to have you. We're hanging out with theologian, educator, author, Rabbi Shai Hill. And you can keep up with him and his work. You can go to X, formerly Twitter, at Held Shai, HeldShai.
Rabbi, before the break, I asked, something that'll just be, I'm sure, a brief answer. On your chapter on engaging chosenness, and Jews as God's chosen people, and of course that the use of that in Christian theology. And as you're making comments about that, I was particularly interested in your use of the story of Hagar in illustrating that and talking about that. If you could talk about that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that. I think, so just to sort of give a context for the Hagar story, one of the most common mischaracterizations of chosenness is really the canard that chosenness means that God loves the Jewish people and is indifferent to everybody else. And I think there is no biblical warrant for that. One example that I talk about in this book that is not usually noted is that Deuteronomy goes out of its way to emphasize that God gives Natan in biblical Hebrew other lands to other peoples, just as God gives Canaan to the descendants of Abraham. And in other words, that God is deeply invested in and concerned with other peoples, or if you will, to borrow a phrase from the Bible scholar Patrick Miller, God has other stories going on in addition to God's relationship with Israel. One of the most interesting biblical texts about that, I think, is, as you alluded to, is Genesis 16, which is the first of two chapters dealing with Hagar, Abram and Sarai's maidservant. And there's a couple of moments in there that are just so striking. The most dramatic one is that when Abram and Sarai talk about Hagar, they never mention her by name. They refer to her as that slave woman, the maidservant. They never seem to fully acknowledge her humanity. And then the angel appears to her in the wilderness, and the first word the angel utters is Hagar. The first thing he does is name her. They see her as nameless, and he says, I know you have a name. And to sort of, constrict the story too quickly, the amazing moment then happens when at the end of the angel's speech to her, Hagar announces, Ata el roi in Hebrew, you are the God who sees me, or you are the God of vision. And she is, as far as I'm aware, the only biblical character to give God a name. And it's also worth noting how wildly subversive this is. Keep in mind, the fundamental, the key, the core story of the Hebrew Bible as Jews receive it, right, is the exodus of Israelite slaves from under their Egyptian tormentors. The story of Hagar is about an Egyptian slave suffering torments at the hands of her proto-Israelite masters, Abraham and Sarai. And God sees her and essentially offers her promises that are akin to the promises God offers to Israel. That is really, really remarkable. By the way, that gets picked up in an interesting way, I think, in chapter 19 of Isaiah, where the prophet imagines a future in which the Egyptians will suffer oppression, they will cry out to God for redemption, and God will redeem them. And the same language is used for redeeming the Egyptians that is used for redeeming the Israelites. In other words, God is not content with the Egyptians knowing God from the side of the powerful who were vanquished. God also wants the Egyptians to know God as the victims who were liberated, as the downtrodden who were raised up. I think there's something so extraordinary and exquisite about that. And just that should complicate the way we talk about chosenness, I think, as it is far more multidimensional and complex than its critics are often wont to suggest.
From a Christian perspective, the idea of Israel, of Jews being chosen, has implications that make it more than just another nation. It makes it more profound because our Messiah is Jewish, and because we think that all of history was focused on that particular revelation. And so you may not think you're special, but I know better. I just I just want you to know that.
I appreciate that, but let me just say, I do think, what I said to George notwithstanding, right? If you want to wrestle with the Bible seriously, you have to engage the notion that God, if you will, has fallen in love with a particular people and entered into an eternal loving covenant with them or with us. I mean, that is really fundamental. You can't really read the Bible and just sidestep that.
No, nor can you read the book of Romans when it says those covenants are still there. They haven't been broken because God doesn't screw around when he makes a deal. I mean, that's
exactly the words Paul uses, right?
I use that technical term.
That's in the Greek.
Yeah, look it up.
Guys, don't go anywhere. The name of the book is Judaism is About Love. And we're learning, and you're learning some things you hadn't thought before. Recovering the heart of Jewish life. A great book, heavy book. You're going to spend some time on it, and it will be worth every minute that you give to it. Don't go anywhere, because we're going to come back. Thanks for joining us, spending time with us. By the way, do you get our weekly email? It's called Key Life Connection. And it's a small thing we do to remind you that God's not mad at you. While you're thinking about it, go to keylife.org/subscribe. And for everybody who does that, you get 3 free cents. That's a joke. Don't send me letters.
Rabbi, I was reading the introduction today, and I was, number one, struck by the fact that it's a very long introduction. But the great thing about it is, most introductions are really, really short. And this is very long, but it's got so much information in it that I was really struck by that. And I appreciated in the introduction where you were very specific and talked about, okay, let's just start off from the very beginning here and talk about the differences between Judaism and Christianity. And you mentioned, Judaism doesn't believe in the Trinity, and and the fact that God did not become incarnate, and that the Messiah has not yet come, etc. And as I was working my way through it, and I knew all that, but as I worked my way through and got into the first chapter, I was struck by that first sentence, which shows how similar, how absolutely alike Christianity and Judaism are, because you said in here, we are loved, Judaism teaches, because God loves us, not because anything we have done or accomplished, but simply because we are created in God's image. So Christianity says exactly the same thing. We're not loved because of anything that we have done. We're loved because we're created in God's image. So my question is, why throughout the centuries are we not able to and obviously there's more than just that, but I was just so taken back by that. Why are we not able to zero in on the places where we can agree that we have similarities and very strong likenesses, and why is it that we have to center in on differences? I grew up in a neighborhood where there were a number of Jewish families, and I heard from people, exactly what you talked about earlier on. Jews killed Jesus. I grew up hearing that, and yet I went to bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs for friends that I went to school with, and was absolutely enamored and loved every part of all of that. I've been to Passover Seders at my neighbors' homes and have loved it and thought, there's so much here that's so rich, and I don't want to center in on that other stuff. Why is it that we do that?
Because we're sinners.
Well, yeah, there's that.
You Jews don't understand that adequately. It's called radical and pervasive depravity. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt your answer.
Look, I think it's a really interesting question. I think one of the challenges, there's a kind of, if you will, an asymmetry between Jewish theology and Christian theology historically on this point, in that Jews have never really thought that you had to accept Judaism in order to be in a good relationship with God and to, quote unquote, merit a share in the world to come. Christians have historically had a very hard time with the notion that one could be, if you will, good with God without being a Christian. And so the Jewish rejection of Jesus, I think, has driven Christians up a wall, if I could use a kind of theological term, right? It has often driven Christians kind of crazy. And that actually led many Christians to specifically focus on those aspects of Judaism they disagreed with, and then often to caricature and, end up saying things about Judaism that were not true. I think, this is part of something for me that has become very important in my own life, which is that it feels to me that in order to be a religious person, like a genuinely religious person, not just to kind of go through the motions, one of the things that we have to do is meet people with genuinely loving curiosity, right? To actually believe that, this is really important to me, right? In Judaism, I'll speak in a Jewish idiom for a minute. There is this notion that every Jew has some insight into the Torah that no one else has. And so they are your teacher. And I really try, it's my aspiration, at least. I certainly am hardly a saint. The only saint in this conference, obviously, is Steve. But I would say that it's really important to me in meeting people who have different beliefs than I do. Within reason, obviously, not if they, believe they should go murder children or something, but, is to say, well, tell me about that. Tell me what the world looks like when you wear those glasses. I just sort of feel like a certain kind of humility is really in order when we're talking to each other. And historically, that has not been humanity's greatest strength, to put it gently.
Radical, pervasive depravity. I just want you to know. Expect it, and you won't be disappointed.
Kathy, you look troubled by my response, so I'm curious whether...
No, not at all. I thought it was a dynamite response.
Yeah, Rabbi, there's a Hebrew word that I unfortunately didn't come across until like a year or so ago, and it's become a favorite. And I wonder if you would talk about hesed and how that idea, what it means, and how that factors into this idea that Judaism is about love.
Yeah, so thank you. So chesed is one of the most basic biblical words that mean love. The term that we often use in English to translate chesed actually comes from Miles Coverdale, who I believe was the first person to translate the entire Bible into English, the first single person to do it. And Coverdale coined the term loving kindness to translate chesed. I guess he couldn't really decide whether the best term was love or kindness, and he kind of, went for a kind of split the difference kind of approach. I have found that really helpful. I have no claim at all about what Coverdale meant by it, but I really like that term because I've started translating chesed often as love manifested in acts of kindness. That is, it is both an internal state, how I think about, interact with, emotionally relate to others, and it is concrete manifestations. I visit the sick, I comfort the mourners, I feed the hungry. And so love manifested as kindness is a really important idea to me. In the Bible, I think you can say that chesed has two dimensions when it's about God's love for us. One is faithfulness and one is love. The idea is not just that God loves us, but that God loves us steadfastly, faithfully, even stubbornly. One of the chapters in the Bible that I emphasize at some length in this book that's really become just enormously important to me in my own thinking is the 11th chapter of Hosea, where God essentially says, I wish I could give you up, but I can't. You know why? Because I'm God and not a person, and I love you. And there is a way in which that steadfastness, that the unfathomable depths of God's love are a constituent part of what makes God God, if you will.
Rabbi,
God's godness is tied up with God's love.
Rabbi, that's the best way I know to land this plane. This has been a dynamite hour, and I hope we can do it again. We rise up and call you blessed for writing this book. Thanks for taking time out of a busy schedule to be with us.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, the book is Judaism is About Love, Recovering the Heart of Jewish Life. Guys, we'll tell you about next week. Don't go anywhere. What a great hour. We all voted and decided that we loved this time. And we loved Shai. The rabbi was articulate. He was fun. And for those of you who are insiders, you can find some of the conversation that took place during the commercial breaks, because they were probably better than the ones that happened on the air. But anyway, it's good. And I loved when he said, Judaism is not Christianity. I'm not a Christian. Don't want to be a Christian. I'm Jewish. And I could have said back to him, a Christian. It's different Judaism, and I don't want to be a Jew. But I would have lied, because there's a part of me that says I am. And I didn't say that. The Apostle Paul said it. He said that God, this is in Ephesians, had broken down the wall of hostility between us and them. And we often forget that. And Kathy, your question was just outstanding. I loved it because it referenced what Paul said, that we are not meant to be separate. Man, we live in a bad world. And if they hate Jews, if you're a Christian, they don't like you either. And if you're a Christian and they don't like you, they don't like real Jews either, or real Christians either, because we believe something that's important. We believe that the Scriptures reveal a God of love, but also a God of justice. And I thought, and this is a good book. It's not an easy book. It's a very big book. It's thick, but it's worth the time you might want to invest in it. It's called Judaism is About Love, Recovering the Heart of Jewish Life. When Kathy saw the title to that, she went, whoa, that is somebody we need to have on. I knew it was going to be a great program. I did. Are you going to do it again next week?
And that's because, as George referred to, because of all your years of teaching and on that subject. So anyway, let me tell you this one really, really quickly. Next week, our friend Justin Holcomb has been involved for years in some books, in series called "Know the Creeds and Councils," "Know the Heretics," "Know Why You Believe," "Know Why We Got Our Bible," and he's recommended. There's a new one out called "Know the Theologians," written by David and Jennifer McNutt, and Justin is the editor, and so we're going to talk. And I was looking at the introduction, and until we get way down to like Martin Luther and that kind of thing, I never heard of some of those people. It's like I'm reading my heritage, and I'm saying, who are the Cappadocian Four?
It's a great Motown band, but we'll learn about that.
We'll learn about that next week.
Theology 101 next week, same time, same place. Hope you join us. And between now and then, don't do anything we wouldn't. And that gives you a wide, wide berth.
On trial.